Deanna, what's your reaction to all this? Are you happy with getting...
Could you say and spell your name for us first?
Sure. It's Deanna Schulman, D-E-A-N-N-A, Schulman, S-H-U-L-L-M-A-N. I'm an attorney at Schulman Fugate PLLC, which is here in West Palm Beach, Florida. Today I was here on behalf of Dow Jones and Company, which represents the Wall Street Journal, and American Broadcasting Companies, or ABC, as you guys know it, and some of you work for. I was part of the coalition of media interveners that intervened in here to interject the public's right of access to the warrant application and the materials attached to that warrant, most specifically the probable cause affidavit that would have been attached to that paperwork.
Can you give us kind of the highlights of what happened today?
Sure. The government, the DOJ, had agreed to release certain materials prior to today's hearing, so Judge Reinhart took care of that off the top. First and foremost, he agreed with the government that the search warrant, motion to seal the search warrant, and the order on that motion should be released. For those of you who are interested in receiving it, that is at docket 57 in the case, and it should, if not already has been unsealed. It will be unsealed today without objection from the DOJ. The main area of concern today was the probable cause affidavit and the application for the search warrant. These are probably very voluminous documents that supported the government's request for the search warrant that you have now probably all seen. That application and its associated probable cause affidavit lays out the government's case and position as to why the search warrant should be executed. So it generally will describe the nature and scope of the investigation, the nature and scope of the records sought by the government, and of course go over the details that justify taking the incredible step of issuing and executing a search warrant at the home of a former president. So that was the subject of today's hearing. There is a standard in constitutional and common law of Florida that says it is the government's burden to justify keeping that under seal. And of course, that was the subject of today's hearing. Can the government meet that burden? Can they show, for example, that releasing certain information contained in those materials would justify or severely impede the investigation, would cause the revelation of confidential informants or confidential witnesses, or somehow so hinder the investigation as to jeopardize the safety and security of it. So that was the gist of today's hearing.
What is your response to the outcome following today's hearing? Do you feel pretty positive now that next week, the government has been ordered to redact some of those documents, turn it in?
Okay, quick question. If I take off my sunglasses, does it ruin continuity for all of you?
No, fine.
No, yeah, take one.
No, you're fine.
Okay, all right. I feel good about today's hearing. Judge Reinhart seems to have a very good sense that it is his job as the gatekeeper in this case to perform his function of balancing the interest in the public of accessing these materials against the interest in the government in keeping them secret. Judge Reinhart gave us some clues to that today by telling us, for example, that at this juncture he is not inclined to keep the entirety of the search warrant application and its affidavit under seal, meaning that he understands that the public is going to likely be entitled to some parts of this warrant application and its affidavit. He will consider redactions proposed by the Department of Justice, which are due to him August 25th. He will accept any briefing of the Department of Justice on those redactions. He will review those materials, and he will enter an order specifying what information, if any, will remain sealed and inaccessible to the public.
What is your response to the government's argument saying that following these redactions that are made, there may be nothing substantial left behind?
Well, I think Mr. Tobin made the right response there. It is up to the public to determine what is meaningful in this investigation. Certainly, Florida has had its share of high-profile investigations. We've lived through Casey Anthony. We've lived through George Zimmerman. We know what redacted court files look like, and we know how to make meaning of them. So if the court is inclined to issue a document with just the first line redacted or unredacted, then that's what we get. And it's up to the public and through its surrogate, all of you, to figure out what the meaning is behind that. But it is not the government's job to tell the public what is meaningful in terms of the release of its own information.
What is your response to the argument that some of the witnesses' accounts are so specific that they would be basically outed or identified by virtue of this affidavit being released?
I think Judge Reinhart is going to protect the identity of confidential informants, and that's probably the right outcome here. We don't want, none of the media interveners want to jeopardize the safety or security of a confidential informant. It is very common in these situations that information that would lead to the disclosure of their identity is kept secret. However, it is important to note that simply saying somebody works for a particular agency is not sufficient. Perhaps saying their title, their post, the number of years they've been in position, and other identifiers may get us there, but the generic fact that there are confidential informants working with the government is not something that I would think is subject to protection.
Can you explain what was unsealed today, and if we're going to get anything new from that?
Today, you're probably not going to get anything new from it. But what was unsealed is the motion to seal the search warrant, which you all have the underlying search warrant, and the order on the motion to seal the search warrant. I would expect the motion to be fairly generic and describing that we have a search warrant, Your Honor, that we would like you to seal, and I would expect the order to be fairly generic. We agree that your search warrant should be sealed.
Did anyone mention the waning credibility of the FBI and the source of the affidavit?
Nobody mentioned the waning credibility of the FBI specifically. However, Mr. Tobin did make the argument that this is a proceeding that's about the credibility of all the players. So whether the judge is doing his job, whether the DOJ is doing its job, that is the proper function of these access proceedings and why the public is entitled to access. That is the public interest. We are entitled to monitor the affairs of our government at all levels, and that is the interest in its essence that we were asserting today.
Did the DOJ offer any clues as to what could be in that affidavit today?
They didn't offer clues as to what's in that affidavit in particular, but they did tell us that it includes a roadmap for the investigation as it stands right now. It explains the scope and breadth of that application, or that investigation, excuse me, and it has a number of confidential informants and witnesses whose ongoing participation may be jeopardized by the disclosure. So generically, the government described the categories of information in the search warrant, and that's why it's very important for Judge Reinhart to look specifically at the search warrant affidavit in light of those, statements that those types of categories are included in the materials.
To clarify, once they've come back with what we want, what we say can be redacted, is that automatically released, or does the judge still have to say, look, I'm gonna decide whether or not this is released? I'm just reading an article that characterizes it one way and not the other, so I just want to make sure I understand that.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question for those of you who are not inside the court hearing. Judge Reinhart actually put forth a procedure that he's going to use in this case. So August 25th, the government will propose its redactions to the search warrant application and its affidavit. They can also file a brief at that time explaining why they are requesting the redactions. At that point, Judge Reinhart will review the requested redactions and review the documents, and he'll make a decision. If he agrees with the government, he'll enter an order agreeing with the government, and we will get whatever it is that the government and he have determined should be released. If he disagrees with the government's requested redactions, Judge Reinhart is the ultimate decision maker here, so he will enter an order disagreeing with the government's redactions, but give the government time to appeal that order before he releases the search warrant and its affidavit. Because of course, if he didn't do that and it became public, the government would essentially lose its right to appeal. So if he disagrees with the government's redactions, he will give the government a chance to appeal that order before he releases the warrant application and its affidavits for the public.
So as far as timeline, when do you think we would actually see whatever is going to be released?
It's really hard to determine. In these access cases, they tend to take a fast track. I was actually pleased to see the Department of Justice say they only needed a week to submit their redactions. That was very kind of them. Oftentimes we see a much longer period. I think Judge Reinhart understands the public interest in these materials, so I think he'll make a swift decision. I'm not going to hold him to a certain time frame because I just don't know. And then if there's an appeal, I think you'll have, members of the public and press pushing for an expedited appellate review system so that the public can have access to whatever it is that the court is going to rule we can have access to rather quickly. In some, it won't be months, but it won't be a week or two either. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
One more time, sorry.
Deanna Schulman, Deanna Schulman, Shullman, Schulman, Schulman, Fugate, West Palm.